Well, hello everyone, and welcome again to Politics in the Pulpit. My name is Matt Forsyth, and I'm your host again for Politics in the Pulpit, brought to you by the Joint Public Issues team. And it's great for you to be on this Advent journey as itself as well. And as this electionary based preaching podcast, we dive into, of course, the electionary for the week and reflect a little bit about what that content might talk to us and speak to us in this political space in the pulpit in particular. But today's episode is a slightly different episode. I dare say it's maybe a special episode, special for maybe a number of reasons. Special because you might be happy to know or sad to know, depends which way you might lean. But this will be my last episode as your host for this season. We have a new host coming to us in the new season in 2025, but also it's special because this, if you like, is the Christmas special. Christmas special is kind of a loosely termed phrase, but I am very glad that instead of three wise men, we have two wise men at least today joining us for this conversation. Voices and faces that will be known to you as the listener or watcher on YouTube at Politics in the Pulpits. Firstly, welcome along to the podcast again, Nathan Maguire. It's good to see you again as always.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
And Steve Hacklesby as well. It's lovely to see you again back at Politics in the Pulpit.
It's really good to be with you.
It's good to see you both, and I'm grateful for the wisdom that you're both going to bring to this Christmas special as we just reflect a little bit both on the year that we've had in the political space and the world space, but also look ahead maybe into 2025. And I thought what would be an opportune time at this moment to maybe just take a restart, take a moment to reflect back of the year that we've had, and would maybe try and do it in a little bit of a fun way, rather than me just simply read out the things that have happened this year, because it's an almighty list, and I dare say you, the listener, might become a little bit saddened if you continue just to hear all that's happened in the world in this last year read out in this form. So I thought we'd try to make a little bit of activity around it. And so rather than pitting Nathan and Steve together against each other, we thought we would maybe bring them together instead. So there's no prizes at the end of this, Steve and Nathan, but there is definitely pride in the JPIT team up for grabs if you want to lay claim to it. So my first question is, can any of you tell me what month Pakistan went to their general election? When do people go to the polls in Pakistan in this calendar year? Can you recall? I wonder. It was the year of elections, of course.
Yes, I don't know that one actually.
No, it's got me that one. It was earlier in the year.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
I will let you have a little bit of a clue. You're on the right track there, Steve, by saying it's earlier in the year. So that's a good start. Have a guess.
I'll have a stab at March.
Oh, okay. I'm going to take that as your answers, both of you. It was not March, it was February, but you were close. You were close. That was a difficult one to start
Very
with.
close.
I
Yeah.
do appreciate that was a very difficult one to start with. But do you remember when there was a significant NATO summit? Plans were announced for NATO heads of state of government meeting take place in Washington, D.C. Do you remember when that NATO summit announcement took place, outlining the task for the alliance? Do you recall when that NATO summit might have been? Nathan's shaking his head. This is not a good start from Nathan. A shaky start, but we can hold on to hope.
We're on
I
the same team.
I'm sorry to say I should know this one and I don't.
Oh,
Uh it I'm gonna go for July.
oh, well, there was a July NATO summit. I'll give you that. From July 9th to 11th, I'll give you that. Because it was a bit of a trick question because there was one in June and indeed in July. So I'll give you that, Steve. Uh,
Oh, that
so
was close on
When
Steve.
Mark Rutte took over as General Secretary.
uh, and I wonder, following on, speaking of, there was an assassination attempt on now President-elect Donald Trump. When was the first assassination attempt? And I wonder if people be shouting this answer in their cars or on the walk. Can you recall when that might have been, that assassination attempt?
Everyone online is going to know this. They're going to be shouting at us at the moment, telling us precisely the day and the month. And
the thing is, I didn't prepare either of you for this. I simply told you before the start of the record. So both of you are being unfairly kind of thrown into this quiz, unbeknownst to either of you. You prepped for lectionary resources, and all of a sudden I'm giving you a quiz on the year.
Was it
No, I
June?
don't know this one.
It wasn't June. It was. I was being a bit cruel because actually it was July because it was the same month. So I stayed in the same month. It was
Okay.
July. And those of you might also then remember that that wasn't the only attempt on President-elect Donald Trump's life. It also happened in September too. Um, can you recall, keeping on the theme of presidential elections, therefore, can you recall when the presidential election in the US took place?
Oh yeah, that was
Hopefully you know this one.
November.
November,
Yeah,
November,
beginning of something
yes,
like the 5th.
yeah.
indeed, indeed. And last but by no means least, um, do you know when, as it was the year of election, uh, when Finland's election was in this year?
Not a clue.
Um, no, it's got me on that
No.
one.
It was in January. So in January, the start of this year. And I wonder if you'd gone into the bookmakers, not that we encourage any sort of betting, but if I wonder if you'd gone into the bookmakers and said some of the things that I've just said, and there was many other things that happened, of course, that we saw the collapse of the French government, of course. We've seen instability in Germany, of course. The G20 summit met in November, and of course, the impeachment in South Korea more recently, and the election of President Donald Trump, and of course, our own election here in the United Kingdom of the Labour Party's Keir Starmer. There was a number of things that happened in 2024, which, quite frankly, many of us would not have expected, or maybe had not really on our bingo cards for 2024. But nevertheless, there was quite a year of activity, and we knew it was going to be with the year of elections that we were up and coming. But nevertheless, it's safe to say it's been quite a full year, hasn't it, Stephen Nathan? It's been a very full year in terms of political activity, world movement as well, in terms of not just political, but economical and social. What stands out for you? I've kind of listed a couple of things, questions there in terms of key markers, but is there a key defining moment as you look back just for a moment before we kind of get into the electionary, look back at 2024 and go, that felt like a real pivotal moment in the life of our world, our nation, and maybe, or maybe you want to bring it closer to your communities in which you're a part of. Is there something which stands out for you? Nathan, I'll come to you first. What stood out for you, I wonder?
Yeah, I think quite a seminal moment was, I guess, the uh, Israeli attack in Lebanon, for example.
Mm,
That was quite a big one. I remember locally that a lot of people having conversations around that, especially with the pages issue,
mm,
and how that kind of really reframed some of the aspects of the war within the Middle East for them. I think also the another one would be kind of Labour's approach to poverty
mm,
and the conversations in poverty over the autumn period. That certainly created quite a lot of conversations around the budget
mm,
and how they spent the money, or kind of took away money, as some people would say, from certain groups. And again, that kind of some key conversations around that. I think if I can, and maybe this may be a shameless plug, I certainly think a really amazing thing was the Dear PM work that went on through Let's End Poverty,
mm,
and to have Keir Starmer actually reference that in PMQs and kind of the work that went on with a variety of different partners and organizations to center lived experience and to have people with lived experience of poverty at the center of that was really inspiring, I think, to end on, I guess, a good note and a positive.
Yeah, thank you for that. There's so much there, isn't there, of things that have taken place, and I wonder people listening as well might recall moments of significance or pivotal moments in their own life, their communities' lives, and indeed the world as well. And I wonder, same question to you, Steve. Is there a moment or moments, but is there things for you which stand out in 2024 that to you and the work that you're a part of and connected in with the Joint Public Issues team that's really stood out for you this year as a seminal moment?
Well, I think what might be really important is the shift in government in Syria. So this is a big moment. It's very recent, but it's a huge moment because it ends 50 years of rule by the Assad family. And many people in Syria are celebrating and seeing this as a new start for the country, an opportunity for the whole of Syria to come together. Others, however, are quite fearful at the moment because HTS, the group that has taken over, comes from the background of Al Qaeda and is responsible for a lot of the conflict and retribution and killing that the country has seen in recent years. So the big questions will be around reconciliation. Can a new political leadership address the past honestly with people and to look to a very different type of future, one in which there is plurality, one in which different ethnic groups, people of political persuasions are respected and given rights and autonomy. Some people in Syria will be wondering whether the leopard in HTS can change its spots. We must pray about this because if it can, then that becomes a potential sign of progress for the rest of the Middle East, and maybe it could be the beginning of some bringing together of different groups that have been fighting over Syria for the years.
Absolutely. It feels a real many commentators, of course, at this moment in time, there is so much commentary in terms of the uncertainty still, isn't there? We're in that very new beginning stage, it feels like. And as we go into 2025, one would be interested to take this moment of what we're talking about right here and to flash forward and reflect back in a year's time to see quite what has happened. But nevertheless, as you said, that point of prayer, how important it is to intercede for this moment in time, because it has quite literally come out of nowhere, but it was not something, again, as we began 2024 or nearly came to the end 24, had it been on anyone's mind that this might happen. And so as we kind of round off 2024, I felt it was important in this podcast, as we talk about politics in the pulpit, that actually we couch everything in the context of what has happened just in this year alone, let alone the years past, of course, but because that does have so much added texture to, I think, our preaching, our way that we communicate, and the way we engage with the world as well. And we mustn't forget those things that have taken place throughout this year as we go into 2025, because it helps inform the way in which we think, it helps inform us in terms of information and knowledge, but also in a way that we critically and also prayerfully consider things for the future. And thinking of the future, thinking of the humble arrival of that baby that we so do prepare for this Advent season. Of course, this is a Christmas special, so we're not just wedded completely to one set of lecture readings. We can dabble around some of the other lecture readings if we so choose, because there's a couple of Sundays in which we're going to be amiss for as a podcast. So it's a little reminder that do subscribe to the podcast if you've not done so already, so that you can get the latest episodes in the new year when we do begin to roll out in 2025. But I wonder, Nathan, first, as we kind of come into this near the end of the Advent season, in the lecture readings that we have, is there ones that particularly stand out? And I guess in the standing out of them, is there one that particularly for you, which you would go as a preacher, I'll have some of that, please?
Yeah, certainly. I think there's a couple that for me are some of my favorite Christmas passages, if you will. So they're the usual sort of Isaiah chapter 9 passage, which most people remember, for unto us a child is born sort of passage. But I think especially for December 22nd, which by the time that this is released, is a lot of people have this on their podcast list. I think Micah 5 is actually it's not a passage that I easily would recognize being associated with Christmas, but actually I was reflecting on this not the other day, and yeah, there's just a few lines in there that I think are worth us exploring as well.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Steve, I wonder, did 22nd of December lecture readings jump out to you? If so, what were they, or did you go somewhere else?
Yeah, they did. Mary's song is just such a wonderful piece of poetry, but also of prophecy and hope, isn't it? Those well-known lines, he's performed mighty deeds with arm and scattered those who are proud. He's brought down rulers from their thrones, but has lifted up the humble. He's sent the rich empty away. And I wonder where that comes from, because Mary, up until now, has had quite a parochial, sheltered upbringing. Not someone who is born to be a national leader, and yet she comes out with words of such wisdom. And I can only think that must be of her own experience of her being lifted up by God from a humble place, and her sure knowledge of that. And that gives her the knowledge and the confidence to be able to speak into some of the power structures that she observes in her time. And maybe it should encourage us also to be able to reflect on these things that we see going on around us in the world, but relating them to God speaking to us wherever we are.
Certainly, and I think it's really interesting, even with that passage. Steve and I were talking briefly before we began recording. The Micah 5 passage actually ties into that with this in verse 2 in chapter 5. It says, "But you, Bethlehem, though you are a small clan among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be a ruler over Israel, whose origins are from of old, from ancient times." And again, it's just the sense of out of what seemingly is an insignificant place, God still works through to make significant and meaningful and lasting change. And I think there is certainly something that gives me hope in that, recognizing that in all of the geopolitical things that we've kind of listed and kind of gone through, most of which are quite sort of unsettling and disturbing for a variety of different reasons, and for a lot of our listeners who have friends within these places, people that we choose to stand in solidarity with, we can often feel overwhelmed and powerless in being able to respond in and see the outcome that we might naturally want to see in the immediate. But Micah 5 reminds us of the greater narrative of Jesus' incarnation in what seems to be an insignificant event. I know we kind of at times we make great fanfare out of it across the world, but actually it's a child that's born in quite a humble means, and for majority of people around him wouldn't have known that he was born. There was no social media at the time, so in that sense, again, just reminded that in our feelings of insignificance, God still works and makes meaningful change. And I think that certainly provides me an impetus and a motivation for me as I reflect on the events this year.
I have to say, there's a very selfless plug in this. What I'm about to say here is that Mary's Magnificat was one of the inspirations for me coming into 2025 in the vice presidential year that I'll be serving in the Methodist Church. We've chosen a theme, Our Story, Our Song. And we've done so because we believe that the psalmist calls and encourages us to sing a new song. And Mary's singing that new song for her, but it's a song of profound faithfulness. It's a song of a personal story of how God chose not the powerful, not the wealthy, not the prosperous, but chose the humble, chose the ordinary, but transformed and looked upon. And it says, of course, the lowliest of his servant, the mighty one has done great things for me. and actually how often we can feel in the context of 2024 as we go into 2025, we can feel maybe that insignificant piece in the puzzle, but actually the Magnificat reminds us of our crucial cog in the wheel, if you like, but actually that we have that role to play too, whatever that might look like. And that's not just a small part, but it's a generational part because that's what the song too speaks to, that generational story. And actually, Mary doesn't just sing for her own experience; she sings of the mercy from generation to generation. And isn't that hope as we go into 2025? But most importantly, uh, it's a story of justice too. God flipping the world upside down. He's brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. My goodness, what a prayer and a hope to bring in 2025. He's filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. You know, Mary's challenge, Mary's song, her new song, challenges the status quo. So my hope as we kind of go as the Methodist Church, and I hope too, of course, denominations that we are proclaiming that good news and are challenging that status quo, and the proud are scattered and the powerful are brought low and the hungry are fed, because that's the kingdom of God coming into being more and more. And so I love this that song of Mary because it is completely inspired some uh, of our inspiration behind the theme that we've chosen as the Methodist Church coming into the Methodist Conference of next year and the year ahead of that, because it's all about singing a new song but it's inspired by our story. And my hope is that those of you that are listening might feel encouraged into 2025, despite all the list of things that I challenge Nathan and Steve to remember. Actually, there is a sense of hope because there's a sense of hope that comes from that Magnificat as well. So I'm quite excited that people get to preach on it just before Christmas Day. I think that's quite timely, don't you?
Certainly.
Absolutely.
And I wonder, therefore, then, you know, thinking of that topic of peace and challenging the status quo, how would you think about that political space? How would you, uh, in this season of time, tackle the idea of preaching about peace in the pulpit? How would you kind of tackle that? Would you, is there certain passages that you already picked out that you would, leverage and talks about peace, or would you kind of do it in a slightly different way? How would you want to be talking about peace, especially in a court? It feels like quite a volatile time. Steve, I'll come to you first, if that's okay, and then I'll get your thoughts, Nathan. But how would you kind of approach that theme of peace at this time?
I think that looking forward to next week year, I look for look at some of the threats that we're faced with in terms of the environmental crisis. War has all sorts of costs. First and foremost, it has devastating human costs, but it also has environmental costs because we have to recognize that as a global community, we live on one planet, and therefore we're going to need to cooperate together. As the next year, 2025, is forecast to be one of the three highest temperatures, average temperatures throughout the year on record. It's not surprising because that seems to be the pattern for most years at the moment. Governments will come together in November next year, and they'll come together in Brazil, and they're meeting for the next COP 30 is going to be a really important summit. And they come together in a city on the edge of the Amazon rainforest. And my hope is that that might focus minds next year on our need to cooperate across nations in order to preserve this planetary ecosystem with which we have been blessed in more faith-based terms, this creation with which we have been blessed and which we are called to care for.
Thank you. That's really helpful and helpful for us as we look ahead to 2025, certainly. Nathan, for you, what stands out in how you would communicate peace in your context or the context that you know of too?
Yeah, I think there's several things. I think the first is that, again, drawing back to the passage in Micah 5, in verse 5, it says quite a profound statement, and he will be our peace. And that really struck me because ultimately, truth and peace in how the biblical narrative presents itself to us is that it's relational. And the shalom of God is ultimately within the person of Christ. And I think for me, that's certainly highlighting that it's an opportunity for us, as well as be reflecting over the year, to reflect on our own individual relationships with the Christ child. I think is really important. And one of the things I really love about the theme of the Methodist Church this year, which is Hush the Noise, taken from a really powerful hymn when you actually read the lyrics. I think it's called Came Upon a Midnight Clear, and just listening to and reading some of the words. So just a few lines above the "Oh hush the noise, ye men of strife," it talks about kind of war and kind of the impact of war, which comes from a place of sin and strife. And I think creating space in our worship communities after you've done all the nativity scenes and you've kind of swapped your mince pies over the couple of weeks, etc. You probably still have mince pies into the new year. But I think kind of creating space for silence and reflection, I think, is really important. And I'd really encourage us to be creative and trying to figure out different ways of creating an immersive experience, whether that using smell, touch. One idea might be that you could have, I don't know, a piece of sandpaper and a piece of cloth, and kind of just that sense of grittiness to softness being presented in what Jesus does in the world, and kind of moving us from darkness to light and from strife to peace. I think the other thing is as well is that one of the things that probably a lot of preachers, if they've preached over the course of so many years, have probably run out of different sort of examples to bring. But one I've certainly used in the past is the Christmas truce that took place over the First World War, which I always think is just a powerful image, and that sense of the two sides of the Allies and the Germans kind of placing down their arms at certain points across the frontier across Europe over a period between the 24th and 25th. And it wasn't all along the sort of frontier, but certainly was that part of it. And that sense, again, that the power of the meaning of what Jesus brings and the fact that we celebrate it actually created temporary truth. And I think that image is just such a powerful one, where people are able to sing carols, even play football, some of the reports say. And if anyone's seen the Sainsbury's advert that ran maybe 6 or 7 plus years ago now, it just kind of presents some of the picture of that. But again, just reminding us that despite some of the horrific, and I mean horrific, things that we've seen, witnessed, and heard this year, that God's on the case, and he invites us in remembering the incarnation to be a part of being on that case. I think, creating that silence, hushing the noise and the much activity, creating space for a personal reflection, repentance of our own indifference at times, but then inviting the Holy Spirit to re-energize us, I think is really a powerful thought.
Thank you. And it reminds me, in the resources of Hush the Noise, you said, picking up on that last point of, and spoiler alert, this is some of the last, it's the 5th of January's kind of resources. It gives the God as song metaphor, and it's explored by Rob Bell's famous Newmar film Rhythm. I was going to read you the quote that he says on it, because I think it's actually a really helpful kind of ending point for us in this kind of podcast at this moment in time before we kind of begin to wrap up. It says, when I think of God, I hear a song that moves me. It has a melody, it has a groove, it has a certain rhythm. People have heard this song for thousands and thousands of years across continents and cultures and time periods. People have heard the song, they've found it captivating, and they've wanted to hear more. They've always there have always been people who say there is no song and who deny the music, but the song keeps playing. So Jesus came to show us how to live in tune with the song. And that speaks to of just a hope that I think, both the Hush the Noise resources that the Methodist Church have put together, but also the wider kind of narrative art what we've been communicating today about actually the hope that we have going into 2025 is that song continues. It's been heard for generations and thousands of years. It's been heard as we probably preach what felt like the same sermon year on year on Christmas Day, but nevertheless, people are drawn to that good news. And it's that good news that drives us into a space of politics in the pulpit, ultimately, because we believe the two can collide and coexist and be able to express and be informative to one another and enable us to be that kingdom presence wherever we may be. And so, Nathan and Steve, thank you for all that you've offered to Politics in the Pulpit on behalf of myself and the wider team to JPITS. And I wonder, as we close off 2024, is there one final thing that you want to just encourage people to maybe engage with, maybe because they're going to miss the podcast, of course, they're not going to hear your voices just until the new year, and they won't hear my voice next year, but they might be dancing in the rain for that one. But what could people do, maybe if they've opened all their presents, they've done all the things they can, is there something they can make as if they're into New Year's resolutions or into that kind of methodology of way of being? Is there something they might want to take up in 2025 that you have for them? Nathan, is there something that you want to encourage people to do in 2025 or to look out for maybe that's on the horizon?
Yeah, certainly. I think I'll let Steve speak to maybe some of the work that we're doing in the background, but certainly our Future of Arms work is something that we definitely want to point people to, which Steve has led on as our policy advisor for Hope on Peace. And I think that's certainly something to encourage people to reflect on in terms of the briefings and helping people engage meaningfully to political action towards peace. So I'd certainly would want people to reflect on that. And the hope is in the early new year, early part of the new year, that we'd be providing more resources as well. So there's podcasts, there's blogs, as well as the briefings, and there's also an introductory video on our website. So yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Steve, I wonder if you want to pick up on that point. He's given you a good plug already.
Yeah.
But I wonder if you want to share anything else too for us before we take this podcast home.
It's interesting when we read the Micah passage, and there Israel is under threat, and the arms that are being talked about are chariots, swords, and spears. Today, when we think about arms, we're thinking about AI, robots, space weapons, lasers. I encourage people to go to the JPIT website and look at the Future of Arms video. There's a 7-minute video there, which we've got introducing this. The arms may have changed. The basic message is very much the same. The Micah passage is a little ambiguous as to how Jesus coming out of Bethlehem is to restore Israel. With hindsight, we see there is a pointing of Jesus towards God's plan and yearning for peace, and that does not change. And maybe we might just reflect also on many places in the world where our brothers and sisters in faith are experiencing conflict, but also experiencing that alongside poverty in countries that have no access to the weapons of power that steer our own nation and its allies.
Thank you ever so much, both of you. And I hope that you do, as you're listening to what Steve and Nathan have shared today, do take up those challenges to engage with the resources, and indeed the resources that will be to come, as well as what we recognise here at the Joint Public Issues team is that not only is there stellar work that's done in preparation, but actually also there is a lot of responsive work that is done throughout the year. And so some of the things in which I spoke to, or we spoke to earlier, or spoke about indeed on this podcast in the last few months, there's been responses where the Joint Public Issues team has been able to rally voices or encourage voices together. And so I really want to just commend the Joint Public Issues team one more time if you're listening to this podcast. And maybe that's my challenge I want to lay down as I leave this podcast space, is to encourage you to invite someone to come and listen to this podcast, maybe share the link with someone, and indeed when the season re-begins in 2025, invite a friend, invite someone in your worshipping community to engage with this, because it's a fantastic resource. The guests are brilliant. And the team, of course, are very wise, as I hoped for at the beginning of this podcast. So Nathan, Steve, from myself, thank you for holding my hand through these podcasts, metaphorically speaking. I'm ever so grateful, and to the wider team too, and for all that you've offered. And I think it leaves us to wish everyone listening to this a very Merry Christmas and a very happy and joy-filled New Year. And until we gather again at some point down the line, I'm sure. But bless you all, and thank you for listening.
And Matthew, thank you for everything that you've done in your time in hosting this podcast. It's been great to have you leading and hosting us.
Bless you.
Agreed.
Thank you all.